Hi everybody, this is Dan again. My first video was so popular, I had to give the people one they wanted with another one. This case review is going to be asking the question, what does brand name or equal mean? And when is generic soda going to be acceptable instead of the classic Coke? As always, mandatory disclaimer, nothing in this video is legal advice, nor is anything I say attributable to anyone or anyone else. All the facts that I'm going to be using come from the GAO findings in the case that's cited below. The government entity in this case is the International Boundary and Water Commission. I'll just refer to as the agency. This organization is responsible for protecting the international boundary between Mexico and the United States, really the Rio Grande River, and keeping that border intact. As I understand, the river rises and floods, which can have some impacts on the physical international border, and the agency is also responsible to keep the dams on that river cleaned and maintained. The requirement for the agency is they needed a big loader like the one in the picture to be moving dirt around in the river near their area of responsibility in El Paso, Texas. The agency's plan in this case was to issue an RFQ, or request for quotes, to buy Caterpillar 980 wheel loaders such as the one on the picture on the right. This was going to be a lowest price technically acceptable wins contract, which means that as long as the specifications that are identified in the RFQ are met, the lowest price offeror is going to be winning. The RFQ established the criteria for award, which included that the loader must meet the salient features or specifications of the Caterpillar 980 to the right. Attached to the RFQ was a two-page spec sheet that had various specifications to include things like 23.5 R25 tire size and a high lift bucket. Now, oftentimes the government will be asking for brand name or equal products. This is pretty common. This is where the government has a requirement for a certain type of equipment that is usually only capable of being met by a particular brand. I like to use the iPhone as a reference for brand name or equal. Let's say a person needs a phone that is compatible with the iOS software, then the requirement would be for a phone that is brand name or equal to an iPhone. Even if it just so happens to be coincidentally that only the iPhone can be compatible with iOS software. In this situation, the brand name was going to be for that Cat 980 loader picture to the right, or something equal to the requirements of a Cat 980 that were specified in the RFQ. The RFQ was issued in the end of April 2023, and then on the 1st of May, one offeror, American Material Handling, aka we'll call him the protester, asked the contracting officer a question. Does the government want a brand name product? We can provide an equal product to that Cat 980 wheel loader. And the contracting officer's response, yes sir, please do. After the email exchange, the agency received two offers. Caterpillar proposed, big surprise, their 980 loader, and then the protester offered what they thought was going to be an equal product, this Volvo loader. I know nothing about loaders, but just looking at the two, they look pretty similar to me, but as we'll see, the specifications of both are quite different. During the evaluation, the contracting officer added 6 new specifications to the evaluation form that were not in the RFQ or in that two-page specification sheet that was attached to the RFQ that had the language regarding the tire sizes and such. And as we'll see, these 6 new specifications were used by the government evaluators in order to be determining the technical acceptability of both the Caterpillar 980 and the Volvo loader that was proposed by the protester. The findings in the evaluation included these 6 new characteristics here. As you can see, the operating weight, horsepower, speed, radius, fuel capacity. And as you can see in the comparison between the Caterpillar and the Volvo products, that the Caterpillar is superior in each: lower weight, more power, a little bit faster, better turning radius, and more fuel capacity. The agency evaluation documentation determined that Volvo did not meet the horsepower requirement or the weights requirements in order to be brand name or equal to the Cat 980. Weight was described as important because a heavier loader means that it's more likely to get stuck when working in sandy or muddy river bottoms. And therefore, the government determined that Volvo's loader was unacceptable and ineligible for award. Of course, the Caterpillar 980 met all the characteristics of a Caterpillar 980 and was determined to be technically acceptable. Because there was only 2 offers, then the winner goes to Caterpillar, right? On September 17th, the agency awarded to Caterpillar for $660,000 over protesters' $598,000 loader. The protester first filed an agency protest, which is kind of like a complaint directly to the agency. It doesn't involve the courts or anyone else, arguing that the evaluation was unfair because these 6 specifications were not identified anywhere in the original RFQ. A few weeks later, the agency rejected the protesters' agency protest, stating that the specification sheet was not the sole factor in determining the award, that there were other criteria that deemed the Volvo loader proposal to be unacceptable. Well, what were those criteria? I mean, that's the question then here in this case is, well, what was the government evaluating? And not surprisingly, the protester, being unsatisfied with this response from the agency, then filed a protest with the GAO. Back to the old review triangle. Always start with the essay question the government is asking the offerors to respond to. And what was it? The RFQ started with a brand name or equal to a Cat 980 loader with those 2 pages of attached specifications. But then the government appears to add 6 new specs that are going to be evaluated to determine whether an alternate product is equal to a Cat 980. Well, let's see how all that worked out, because ultimately here, the government, it creates this essay question. The burden is going to be on the government to clearly state what it is, what the question is, and then stick to it, because that is going to have a direct impact on what the offerors are going to be responding to, and then also how the evaluators are going to be analyzing and drawing their conclusions for acceptability. This is a very narrow case. The protester arguing that the government's award was based on the evaluation criteria, these 6 new specifications here that were not in the RFQ. That is, how could the protester have known that their Volvo product was not going to be acceptable as a brand name or equal when the government surprises everyone with these 6 new specifications that they wanted during the evaluation? Now, the agency's response is that, hey, this RFQ said that the loader must meet the specs of the 980. Even if there were specs not specified in that 2-page attachment that mentioned the tire sizes and high lift and all of that stuff, all the specifications of a 980 have to be met. And then therefore the government was free to pick whatever specifications a 980 has that it needs to complete the work to ensure that it gets a product that's equal to a 980. Referring to the review triangle, the GAO is going to start with the criteria in the RFQ, then move to what was proposed, and then finally to the government's evaluation documentation. The GAO standard of review is, as always, was the government's award decision reasonable? The GAO found that when using a brand name or equal criteria in a contract, the government has a duty to tell the offerors what specifications are essential to the government in the RFQ. Brand name or equal does not mean that the government always gets the classic Coke over the Aldi brand or Costco brand cola. We always start with what is the government's need that's stated in the RFQ. The alternate generic Diet Cola product does not have to match the brand name Diet Coke on a molecular level. It just has to meet the specifications that are identified in that RFQ. And the GAO then cites to FAR 11.104B, which requires the government to specify what are the characteristics of the brand name product that an alternate item must meet in order to be acceptable. Now, this is important as it prevents the government from simply just requiring brand name products all the time. The government must state what is the requirement, and if it happens that no other products on the planet meet the requirement other than Diet Coke, then Diet Coke is permissible. Back to the iPhone example. I have an iPad. I need a phone that's compatible with my iPad. The requirement is compatibility with my iPad. And in RFQ, I would need to state, I need a phone that is brand name or equal to an iPhone for this compatibility requirement with the iPad. It just so happens that only an iPhone can do that requirement. So ergo an iPhone is the only one that's technically acceptable. But I am still required to state up front this iPad requirement in my RFQ and not ambush an Android vendor halfway into the evaluation process. Here, the GAO rejects the agency's finding and sustains the protest. The GAO found that the RFQ language that the loader must meet the salient specifications does not mean that every possible specification on a Cat 980 must be matched by an alternate product. Here it looks like the government might have got a little overboard. Oh, the alternate product did not have a Caterpillar emblem on it, and then therefore it does not meet the salient specifications needed by the government for a Cat 980 loader. The government found that the agency was not clear in what specifications were going to be evaluated, and that these 6 new specs added over here unduly restricts competition because it basically renders any competitor's product from being considered, which could harm the taxpayer. In this situation, it's possible that the government paid $60,000 extra for this Cat 980 loader over the Volvo. The GAO directed the agency to either redo the evaluations or modify the RFQ to be changing the evaluation criteria to include these 6 additional specifications. And as always, when there's a sustained protest, the protesters' lawyers always get paid. My takeaways from this: the RFQ evaluation criteria must be followed by the government. If the RFQ did not have specifications like weight and horsepower and all these other things, then the government cannot later use those specifications as a filter to be eliminating the proposals. Now, brand name or equal, again, the need. What is the job that needs to be completed, and what type of equipment is needed to get that job done? I go back to that iPhone compatibility with an iPad, for example. It just so happens an iPhone meets that requirement. Here, from what I can see, as I take a look at this holistically, I think that the government wanted a Cat 980 loader all along. They got surprised by the Volvo loader being proposed and then tried to back in during the evaluations as to why a Cat 980 loader is the only loader that can do the job. Now, the RFQ didn't clearly articulate what specs are special about a Cat 980 so that no other loader can meet, and that confused the offerors as the protester didn't know what specs they were going to be graded on. The essay question for the offerors what became in essence a moving target. And that email exchange smelled bad, all right? The protester asked specifically if it was okay to provide an equal alternate Cat 980 product, and the government responded, yes, sir, send over a quote. I imagine the protester was quite in shock when they saw these 6 new specifications, which really imply that the government just wanted a Cat 980 and the protester was strung along. So kudos for them to seeing it through with both the agency protest and with the GAO protest. And then lastly, the agency had a chance to fix this with that agency protest that was filed, but chose to fight anyways. Again, understand circumstances are different, leadership decisions, there's timelines. Yes, it would take time to stop, play with the evaluation criteria and redo the evaluations, but there was a opportunity to avoid what appeared to be a loser protest by the agency and get it done right. And because in my experience, usually offerors don't just go away with these types of agency protests. That's all I had. If you enjoyed this video, please like or comment, or otherwise let me know if there's interest for me to be making more of these.